What's going on, guys, and welcome back to this episode of Split Screen D&D, the place where we're attacking all things Dungeons & Dragons from both sides of the screen. As always, my name's Tom Quinn, resident Dungeon Master here at Modern Myth.
And I'm Josh Winans, resident player character here at Modern Myth. So, Thomas, I'm sorry to use your full name here.
That's fine, Joshua. Let's do
this. So I was thinking about a subject, and something that's interesting in the world of D&D is, yeah, you are the hero. You are the main man. But oftentimes, even as a hero, you find yourself beholden to higher powers. Maybe that higher power is a god or goddess. Maybe it is a patron. Maybe it's a lord. Maybe it's a brother. Maybe it's a father. But you usually find yourself somewhere in your relationships with your character in the game, beholden to a higher power. And I think that would be a very interesting subject to talk about today.
I love it, as I get to run the vast majority of those higher powers.
Oh, yeah.
I love when you are beholden to those entities. Before we dive into that, though, you guys, as usual, are just crushing it down in the comments. If you have not already, now's the perfect time to subscribe. You will absolutely make our year. We're shooting for 500 before the new year. That's a big goal for us, but you guys can be the 500th if things time out right. But keep smashing that like. That helps the algorithm. And a huge help here on the channel is if you guys are sharing any of our content that you're enjoying out on social media. It really helps the channel grow. If you want to support us directly, you can do so patreon.com/modmyth. Let's get into higher powers being beholden to. And I guess I do think it's important to clarify.
Yeah.
We are saying higher powers, and I think in many regards, you're generally not beholden to lesser power. There's something about a relationship that is compelling you to serve it. So even though it might be a brother, like maybe you're a pretty lateral relationship, there could be good reason why you feel beholden to that character in your story. But the obvious ones, like you pointed out, deities, demonic or fey patrons, if you're of the warlock persuasion, nobility, whether they be kings, lords, what have you.
Yeah.
So I want to pitch it straight to the player side because fundamentally that's in your wheelhouse. I mean,
it is my wheelhouse as a player character.
Well, and as a paladin.
That's very true. And that's talking about, I think, I think it's a spectrum of what you find yourself when you talk about higher powers. I think god and goddesses are like, if you're finding yourself as a paladin or a cleric, that's like the extreme on the spectrum. And it can fall anywhere. And I as a player character, I think it's so important to think about these things, especially in character creation, but also as you progress through your character's story, is how often do you come across a hero who is solely doing everything purely for themselves?
Yeah, I think, certainly in a heroic arc, the nature of being a hero almost precludes you from doing things solely for yourself.
Which also to say that, not saying that, because I'm thinking immediately of Han Solo. He starts off as that smuggler, but it turns into he came back and helped us. So he turned into a hero. So I mean, you don't always have to start off with one. But if you play your entire career and don't have some alliances with someone who's greater than the ideals that are greater than yours or something like that, I think you're really missing out on what the D&D can offer.
Yeah, I think there's probably a few archetypes that try to, and some of them maybe successfully and some less so, circumvent that tie, that tether. But I agree that I think the aspect of one of the defining factors between being a protagonist and being a hero is a sense of selflessness. And whatever reason that is, if that's a paladin fighting to the bitter end to spread their god or goddess's will and message, if that's a son defending his farm from bandits or raiders, I mean, it's so I think that hero threshold almost demands it of a character, that you are beholden to something. I think let's start on the extremes if we can, because I think when I'm thinking about a higher power, I think we start getting into a really gray area if we're talking about a cause. I'm beholden to a cause. That cause is not a sentient thing that has a will, and I think that's one of the things to me that's defining the sense of a higher power.
Right.
So again, just like you laid out, a father, a king, a god,
Right.
all have their own motivations in the world. And if you have linked yourself to them, there's some really interesting implications for roleplay and things like that. So let's start on the extremes, and we can work our way to
Gods and goddesses.
grayer area if that works. Yeah, gods and goddesses. I'd put patrons for the warlock side of things.
Okay,
as close as you're going to get. I mean, that those at least exist.
Yeah, well,
you're not existing beholden to the mortal realm where a king, which might be a very, very high position in the material plane, might not mean anything to a god, might not mean anything to a demon or a fey being.
So yeah, let's definitely start with god and goddesses. I kind of want to keep patron just a little bit separate. I agree, there's a lot of overlap.
Perfect.
But so yeah, as a god and goddess, because I play a paladin, and so and I understand, and I've talked about this in other episodes, that in the D&D 5e universe, that as a paladin, you don't have to be beholden, you don't have to worship a god or goddess. You can believe in something. I don't like it. I'm sorry, I don't. It doesn't make sense. How do you get divine powers unless you get it from a divine being?
I'm the same. And there's gonna be, like I said, there's all sorts of things about the 5th edition space that we tweak and shear and mold.
Right.
I think many of them towards an older thought process on the paladin. I mean, I think there was a time in which there was not a question about what was required of you as a paladin to have your faith-based abilities.
And being beholden, I mean, your battery, so to speak, is your goddess is bestowing that upon you. Without that, if you're a paladin, you're a bad fighter. I mean, you're just not that great. But with it, suddenly you're one of the strongest classes. And I think when you get that kind of extreme, I think there should be some, I don't want to call them limitations, but just some understanding that you are getting from something else that might have a agenda different from the one that you might be holding.
I would go so far as to say you can take might out of that phrase. I think it's a virtual guarantee that you are signing a contract that has fine enough print you cannot read it. And while I think the lore of the world and oftentimes the DM are beholden to the lore of these pantheons, the idea that a character has any concept, especially at level 1, like you're a level 1 paladin, I mean, effectively you haven't really gotten anything yet from your god or goddess.
I think you get Leon. So you get some stuff, but not like you don't get the subclass stuff.
But the idea that you've signed into that contract at that early stage, the idea that your character could have any concept of what the motivations of that god or goddess,
right? And when you think about what a god and goddess is, I mean, they haven't been on the existence for like 50 years. They've been existing for thousands of years. Oh, it depends on what god you're talking about here. But they've been existing for a long time, and they've been playing games and making moves for so long that this is tangled web. And to think that your mortal mind can possibly comprehend all the little moves they're making, it's I think unreasonable.
Yeah, and something that you alluded to was the idea of limitations coming with power, and this is something I actually think we touched on a little bit in kind of the caster martial consideration. I'm a big fan of giving a character substantial power, but have it hamstrung with a crippling limitation. I mean, have both ends of the spectrum, and have other characters that don't have those extremes. I really like that. By nature of we'll call it the extreme end of the spectrum and being in the service of a god or goddess. And this, I don't think is a this is a rulings, not a rule thing. This ultimately comes down to your DMs, your table as a whole. I'm personally a fan of, or say it wouldn't bother me to be able to look at clerics and paladins and go, wow, these are really potent classes, but XYZ. And that but, the fact that it's not laid out hard and fast, it kind of doesn't exist. I mean, if you and I were to go to the mat on the rules, there's nowhere I could point to and go,
you could make me become an oath breaker maybe, but that's still not bad. I'm still having powers. I'm still doing things.
Yeah, no doubt. I just think to me, one of the costs of being tethered to that deity, and I don't like, this is not the context that I like having this kind of conversation in, is the context of like a punitive context.
Okay.
I don't like the idea of being a DM embodying your god or goddess in a punitive fashion. I think that is a slippery slope to adversarial DMing.
Yes. Very.
But I also think that if as a DM, you're treating this god like they have like the player is of any substance, they are a god.
Right.
Like you might be their avatar. You might be a big deal relative to everyone around you.
Right.
But you are still a mortal. And, so to do something that displeases this god, I think one of the costs of being beholden, again, this isn't etched in stone anywhere, so you can't point to it. But I like the idea. Like I would moving into future editions, and actually, I think the alignment system, to some extent, addressed this in older editions. But I think there's huge opportunities thematically and narratively when I can, as you move later into your levels, to the point where maybe you are actually able to converse with this deity in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
Where there's obviously a ton of narrative leverage that a DM wields there. Needs to be wielded very responsibly.
Right.
There's huge opportunity to be able to pose the questions. I think this is another, I think we touched on this in the DM PC space, because you can do this with just a regular old NPC. If they are near and dear to the party, you can introduce questions about these characters that they may not be asking themselves or each other. But for a god to say, what is it you really want? You're at this crossroads, like that's my path right there.
Yeah. That's pretty clear.
And that's the path I can feel. I know how badly you want to take that other road.
Like the rest of your party wants to go down that road.
So, you not being beholden to anyone, say you're a fighter instead of a paladin.
Yeah.
I have no opportunity to put that question to you. You simply have to ask that question of yourself. And sometimes players do a really good job of asking those questions of themselves and of allowing that aspect of roleplay to manifest where they're conflicted. But a god is a very tangible thing. And this applies not at all exclusively to deities, but it is a space in which a lot of the moral, ethical, and even just kind of pragmatic directional questions for a character can be put to them. You don't have to beat around the bush and go, I love what's happening with your character. I really hope that comes out between you and your fellow players.
Right. Maybe
it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But if things are going to the place where it's like, man, it's been a long time and he's been struggling with this, that dream sequence where you just have a very brief interaction with your god, goddess, patron, dead uncle, whatever it is, might materialize a question that the party as a whole has either been dancing around or has just not been materializing. And so I think there's a lot to be said for the value of that, but the understanding that as a player, I don't know many DMs who are going, you should be a paladin this round. You should play a paladin. You should be a warlock. You should be, whatever. it's the player's decision to tether themselves to something.
Right.
And that something is DM controlled.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a player, both as a player and a DM, but I think it's hugely important for a player to understand that if you're tethering yourself to a skin that the DM is going to be responsible for wearing,
Yeah.
they are as fallible as you. I think they're a DM in good faith wants to present those situations, in a meaningful and fair way.
Right.
But it also, you might be sitting across the table going like, I'm having this conversation with my God, and like, I'm not caring for our relationship right now. I think the answer, and this again, the big if being if the DM is acting in good faith, they're not trying to, they're not trying to railroad you, they're not trying to squash you, is tough. You're immortal and they're a god.
Yeah.
Not only that, most of what you can do, you owe to them.
Right.
Like in the scheme of who needs who more, it's but it's a player's choice to invest in that relationship. And
Right.
I think that shouldn't be taken lightly. All that to say, it's always the player's choice to play a class that is rooted in these fashions. And so don't be surprised when your DM goes, well, it's going to be really disappointing if you never once in 20 levels hear from your god who's been bestowing,
Just throwing you powers with no
your god, your patron, whoever should be an active member of your story.
Very active.
And you as a player don't have a say in what the motivations of these beings are.
Right.
And so you're entering into that contract knowing that part of your job is to maintain those negotiations.
Absolutely.
So talk with me about that thought process, because
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty DM headspace on it.
It is, but it translates. As a player character going into it, I think you hit on a huge thing that you need to have that good faith. That when I signed up for Paladin and I signed up for my goddess that I signed up for, I'm saying, hey, this is who I'm signing up for. I'm trusting you to some degree. Like, hey, let's enter this partnership together. And I think as a player character, what can happen is we get in our headspace like, oh, I'm a paladin of Bahamut. Therefore, I'm going to study Bahamut, and I know all the Forgotten Realm lore, and so I think I know what Bahamut is like. And then as a player, when the DM and wearing the god skin does something different to what you think they're going to do, that can be why are you doing that? I know what my god would do. You are playing my god wrong. Well, you hit it on the head. We don't know like we think we know. I mean, who knows? Maybe Bahamut has some like weird things happening underground where he's trying to finally kill some Tiamat or something like that.
He's actually chaotic evil from the core.
Yeah, no, that's extreme. But like maybe he's doing some stuff that you're like, oh, perfect example is, hey, you come across a town that is rife with sin. And Bahamut commands thee to smite those that need to be smitten. And what do? Well, hang on, there's babies and kids down there. Are you going to...
sinner babies.
Sinner babies.
I think I was clear about them being
sinner
babies.
No, it was very clear that they were born sinning. I don't know what babies do to sin, but they were doing it all, baby.
This is a terrible town. This town is horrible.
It's horrible from the moment they're born. Anyway, so that would be an interesting, like... As a player character, I might say, like, that's not what Bahamut would do. Man, it might be exactly what Bahamut would do.
Well, and I think to some degree, you get into a space, and this is especially pertinent in homebrew settings.
Yeah.
Where like, I think by and large, if you have sat down at the table agreeing to play in the Forgotten Realms or agreeing to play, I mean, pick your poison, pick whatever setting it is that you want. But if you're in that, there's some understanding. And I think something I would say is, as a DM, if I'm overhauling a god or goddess or an entity in a major way, that's a mutual understanding we need to have.
Yeah.
The caveat being, unless that is part of the arc, but it's just the deal where
saying.
if
I didn't see. Yeah, because that's taking it to an extreme. But you're right. That could happen at tables where it's like, oh, you chose Bahamut. Guess what? That mother effer is now chaotic evil. You signed up for this, and it's
Right.
yeah, that.
And I mean, I would say that that's a bad faith.
That's a very bad faith,
approach. But I think the biggest thing is to say, in the same way that, I mean, how would a player feel for a DM to go, like, dude, you're a paladin. What are you doing? You're playing your character all wrong. What are you doing?
Right.
You know, like, it's kind of one of those deals where even if you disagree, again, I mean, like, step into that actual space for a minute. You are staring up to the heavens as something beyond your comprehension in scope and scale.
Right.
Is, you know, breathing down upon you, and you're going like, that's not what you'd have done.
Yeah.
You know, like, I mean, it's just a deal where you kind of have to roll with the punches. And those punches should be sparring and in jest if everyone's there in good faith.
Right.
But I think it is something to be conscious of, because I think anytime you are choosing to, I'm going to use the term shackle. It's kind of a negative connotation. Tether, shackle, whatever.
It is Tuesday. I like shackles.
But to be tied to another entity that you know the DM is going to control means that there's going to be times you might be taken aback by the behavior of that entity, and that's not a moment to go, no, this is wrong. This isn't the way this would play out. It's a moment for you to go, how strong is that tether? How strong is that bond? I mean, is burning this town to the ground, razing this town, men, women, children, livestock, all of it to the ground, is that worthy of breaking your oath?
Right. No, the babies were fine, but man, the pigs, man, I couldn't do that.
Well, I mean, they're the pigs were the small collateral damage in that circumstance. Pigs didn't do anything wrong. Like,
yeah. No, they were sinners too.
And Muhammad acknowledges that as well. He was like, the pigs, but you know, it's gonna be a major look. You wanna run like a heist sequence, try to get the pigs out of town without alerting people that they're about to all be genocided. But you know, so I just think I think the root of it always goes back to, you know, the level of trust you have with your DM, and you get to choose if your class is tethered to your DM in that fashion. If you can't enter that relationship with the amount of trust you feel you need to, don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it sucks to go like, well, I really want to play XYZ.
Yeah.
Well, are you going to enjoy playing a paladin with a bad faith DM who keeps showing up as your god, being like, no, you wanted to go left back there. There's cool stuff if you go left. Go left.
I'd make the argument that's a bad table and you should probably play it at it.
Well,
anyway.
that's true. I would say, but I think there's shades of gray there.
Absolutely.
And I would say that. Yeah. So you know, in that regard, I think a lot of what we've already said trickles down to all of those 100% levels.
I do want to hit a little bit on the patron, though.
Well, I actually think the patron is the most interesting.
Yeah.
It's not the greatest extreme, but I think the relationship is definitionally, or not definitionally, but can have all of the trappings.
It should have a lot, I think, but because it's the same idea, right? You are beholden to something that is otherworldly, whether that's a demon, some like weird Cthulhu creature, or you know, there's Fae, there's actually they even got like the heavenly being type things now. But so it feels very god and goddesses. But what would you say is the difference between a patron and a god and goddess?
I think a couple things. I think the power dynamic is one of them.
Yep.
I think oftentimes there's a reason, like this bargain that you struck has given this patron or continues to give this patron something of value. That's not to say that gods might not find some value out of you, but to me, that's kind of a one-way street. Like what you're giving them is representation for the faith.
Right.
You know, like your deeds will sing their songs, whereas, you know, a patron, you guys can hate each other. You can can want nothing to do with each other, but you're both useful to one another.
I totally agree. And I often think of like the god and goddesses. They get their power. I don't know how true this is to the lore, but this is what I think I read somewhere and I really liked it. The more followers they have, the more power they have. So they definitely like, yeah, go out and sing my praises, show the good works or bad works, depending on who you're worshiping.
Right.
That so they get the power. But yeah, I totally agree that that when you have the patron, it's a they're almost desperate, just as desperate as you probably are for striking the bargain to some degree. Maybe that demon you signed your soul, it's all it wants is to it's stuck in a prison. And it's just, I need to get out of this prison. Oh, thank God someone touched the chalice that I'm possessed. And now, heck yeah, I'll give you some powers, but you've got to hold your end up too.
You got to go smash that son bitch and get me out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the tit for tat nature, it doesn't always have to be that way, certainly, but I think, and like I said, I think the paladin and cleric side of things, there is an aspect of devotion of willful devotion.
Let's say you want to follow that god or goddess.
And I mean, they might be evil, they might be good, they might be anything in between, but they represent an ideal that you want to strive to uphold.
Yep.
I think that patrons I think are like the sex workers of the.
Put that in the comments. Patrons are the sex workers.
I think it's far more a transactional experience where
interesting way to put it, but
it's it's just a deal where like presumably the patron is more powerful than you. They're giving you powers.
I have to assume, like otherwise, yeah.
But it is this idea where, I think it's this idea where once that transaction is conducted and you guys have gotten what you want out of each other, you might hate the fact that you released that demon from the prison. It might be the worst decision you ever made.
Right.
But that transaction is, that you cash the check, and you could even become a source of your character's drive. Like, I got to put them back,
right? Which is also awesome.
Really cool, interesting stuff to play out there. I do think warlocks and patrons, from a DM standpoint, for that reason, because the relationship between the two can be so dynamic. There's some interesting variability in power structure. There's a warlock who goes, I'm done with you. I'm relinquishing these gifts. I'm exacting, or I'm enacting my release clause.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is.
You're smart enough to have one of those.
That's not a bad bluff to run to get a sense of how badly your patron values you.
Yeah, exactly.
And your patron might go like, bye, I'm out, bye.
Or you might be like, okay, fine, you don't have to do this other thing, but if you still want my power, or they might make it, instead of like a flow of power, it's a little trickle of power.
Right.
Which,
so I think that for that reason, you have all of the flexibility in the world. Whereas again, you are far more rigidly tied to the behavior of a god or a goddess, because it's so well established in lore.
I do want to tackle, can a patron cut off the flow of power?
Well, I mean, I think the technical answer is no. I think this has been addressed.
Yes, the technical answer is, but what do you, because we had like the paladin and the cleric.
Yeah,
like,
well, I think, and this rolls into the topic of consequences, and this is another thing, and this, like I said, this should echo through any level of allegiance that you might have, whether it be with a god all the way down to a family member or a minor lord or what have you. I think oftentimes players can enter into these contracts, these allegiances, these tethers, fully acknowledging the boon of the benefit of that relationship.
Right.
I think always they should be entered in first and foremost going, what does this look like if I fuck this up? What does it look like if you really mess things up with that god or goddess?
Right. We've never had that conversation. We should have that now. We'll do that later.
That's and I think, but I also think that I think a big part of that could come from a misunderstanding of what it means to be in service to that god or goddess.
Yeah, which
but,
I feel like we've been pretty aligned thus far.
That I think we have been very of the same headspace.
Right.
But whether it's again that minor lord where you break the allegiance and that could spin that minor lord into a vendetta that whirls him into a big bad by the end of the. I mean, there's any number of consequences, but all of them should have consequences. As a DM, if you have lent your strength, lent your power, lent your potential to a cause, and you screw them, most gods, patrons, kings, brothers aren't going to go like, well, it's no big deal. We got slaughtered at that battle because you never showed up.
Oh, it's okay. Forgive and forget.
Don't worry about it, Robert the Bruce. It's no big deal.
Right. William Wallace didn't get his revenge in the movie. Anyway.
But it's one of those, that idea that, I mean, I think 100% as a DM, if your players aren't asking those questions, you need to absolutely know a betrayal of this contract that is coming together. What does that mean for my half of the equation?
Right.
The king that you have gone into their service,
right,
and you've promised something. If you don't deliver, or even worse, if you actively work against the deliverance of that goal, what lengths is that king willing to go to have justice, vengeance, what have you? That's something a DM should, as far as I'm concerned, you absolutely should know, because you need to understand the motivations of the characters you're going to inhabit.
Right.
So I think in that regard, the extreme being from the god or goddess standpoint, I mean, I absolutely, if you shit on your god, maybe you need to go into a paladin powers timeout for a little while. Like, why don't you run this next fight?
Right.
As
as a bad fighter.
Yeah. It's like, and I think, again, I think that can feel punitive. But
it can.
The trade-off is you chose to be aligned with that god, and you chose to shit on them. Yeah. Why did you make both those choices if you didn't want part of your story to involve the consequences of those choices?
Right. No. And it's so, speaking from so as a player character, I wrestle with this a lot, that I feel like I always have to make the optimal choice. And so when you're being put in these situations as a player, like, hey, don't be afraid to be like, hey, no, maybe you worshipped Bahamut, but as you have grown as a character, you found that, hey, I can't follow this lawful good business. And you naturally pull away. Yeah, there might be a consequence to that, but I don't think, maybe this is a good faith thing, that if I made that choice, that you'd punish me for the rest of the campaign.
No. In fact, I think, to me, the idea of going, I cannot raise this town, like I thought that we were of the same. We were cut from the same cloth. I thought that I was the guy who could enact your will. But if this is what your will looks like,
can't do it.
You need to find another arbiter. To me, you can't be handed more fertile territory for interesting stuff as a DM.
Yeah.
Now, I think a lot of players, like you said, I think they're dissuaded from decisions like that because they're worried about the consequences. I think... failures, suboptimal decisions, it's all of the, all of the flavor of the table of the story of really most any story is churned up by the missteps and the mishaps.
Yeah.
And, and I think certainly as a DM, if I was there bearing witness to this, it's my job to still wear Bahamut and go, what would Bahamut do when he's being just told outright no? You know? I have to make good with that. as a player, kind of this is getting out of the player, or I should say DM NPC skin. As a DM, anytime I see a player, I mean, it's pretty easy to see when a player is making a decision that they know is going to bear consequences, serious ones. I mean, I think, and I'd love to hear in the comments other DMs. I mean, give your descriptions of these moments that you've seen from your own players.
Right.
But I respect the hell out of when I see a player do something and I go, we both know what the optimal move. We both know what the easy move was. We both know what the optimal move was, and you chose to do neither. Right. And it speaks volumes to the table, to the DM, to the themes and the narratives of the story about your character. Oftentimes, especially if it's to do with your patron, your god,
your source of power.
Yeah, it is going to be a pivotal moment. And my thinking ultimately, I mean, immediately what comes to mind as you were bringing that up and going like, what happens if I have to say no to this? Is, yeah, I mean, if it's a hard no, if it's a I'm done, I'm laying down the crest, I'm turning in my wings, I'm cougar in it. If that's the case, I won't do Bahamut justice without there being some repercussion to that. Yeah. Because you can't respect a Bahamut who goes, okay, you do whatever you want.
No, I totally agree with that. But if you say, okay, you get stripped of all your powers, you're now a level 12 paladin, but you no longer have any access to spells, you don't have access to smites. I think that for the rest of the campaign, obviously, now should there be a period where you go through that? I see no problem. But
yeah, I mean, I think it could be handled a number of ways. I think one, you could go
Oathbreaker.
Well, I think you could. There's Oathbreaker is certainly a path. You could kind of modify subclass.
Yeah,
and the Oathbreaker is a very obvious one. I think there's other classes where characters could make decisions that so starkly pivot away from the theme of who they thought they were.
Like a total different class change.
Well, I might even go so far as to go, what came to mind for me is your punishment is some sort of punitive implications on your powers, the ones specifically derived from Bahamut or whatever other god or goddess you serve, with an arc that is your opportunity to really decide.
Yeah.
Do I want these back? Am I willing to go back? And if your answer at the end of that arc is no, then you and I need to have a conversation about what class are you actually?
Yeah.
Like if is a paladin stripped of their divine powers simply a fighter? I don't know. Yeah. But that's a conversation for us to have. Yeah. But one in which I think I would come in and I would go, you're not. I mean, you've decided no, you're not a paladin anymore.
Right.
I mean,
so we gotta figure that out.
But I think there's interesting space to do really cool things, by flexing that. So and like I said, I think let's bleed this right down into the more mundane.
There we go. Because I was wanting to switch, but I think there's a lot of carryover.
A ton of this carries over, and specifically even staying in the consequences space, because the consequences are very different for pissing off someone on the material plane than someone who you by class are tethered to.
Right.
They're going to tend to be more narrative.
Yeah.
If you have scorned a powerful lord, well, maybe that's enough to push him over the edge and he marches to war. Maybe the war that was brewing, by you switching to the other side, that's it. That he has lost his champion. Who knows? There's like I said, there's a lot of thinking I think that needs to happen on the DM side about the motivations of these characters, because you don't want these to be, hey, you just did something and now I need to have a totally knee-jerk reaction to what this character, like a character that you are importantly aligned with, I should understand the motivations of that character almost as well as you understand the motivations of yours.
Okay, yeah, well, yeah.
Such that I understand, like you probably understand that if you, being that you are a paladin of Elistray, if you probably have an idea of where the line would be in which you'd have to say, I'm done.
Yeah.
You know, if I asked you as Elastrade to do something, probably it'd be in bad faith, given your track record with her.
Right.
But, you know, I think you probably, as a paladin, should have some understanding of the bounds to which you would follow your god or goddess. And if the answer is I'd go anywhere, then one, you're a zealot, and two, I mean, I think that's fine. But I think I think that it would begin to speak to your character as not being the hero of the story.
Yeah.
You know, if Elastrade goes, I need you to raise that town, and you go like, done.
Yeah.
And you just you know, like I think the rest of the table should go, oh, we might be staring at the big bad here. Like this is I mean, you know, no joke. So but yeah, so talk with me a little bit about the higher powers that exist on, and again, 5th edition. By about level 3, there aren't many, but by sheer mechanical capabilities,
I guess.
But I think there's a lot of consideration with regard to social power, military power, religious power. Let's say you're a fighter and you're going up against a priestess. Well, they may well, you know, maybe by level you're pretty evenly matched, but you're also pissing off their god and all of their acolytes and all, you know, I mean, all, you know, power is not to describe your mechanical prowess by level.
Right.
But I don't think it's any secret that by the end of the game, the players, you know, are capable of shaping the fate of the continent.
Right, by level 20, absolutely.
Yeah, and that actually leads into one of the interesting aspects of being beholden to a being that can give you nothing. Choosing to be beholden to that king as a level 20 character, I can't think of anything a king could possibly give.
That you couldn't give yourself, kind of a thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the same way, a brother is maybe a better example.
Okay.
A brother who never left the farm.
Right.
Never, you know, you went off to adventure, you know, whatever. But this is someone that, you know, he's your older brother. You
always look up to him.
You're, you know, anything, you know, well, I mean, anything within the scope of your understanding of his capabilities to ask, you do for him.
Yeah.
I think there's some interesting considerations for when you begin to cross that line where you are getting less and less out of those relationships, but still choosing to remain in the service of, you know.
Well, then that brings up a good point that I mean, this whole entire conversation, we pretty much talked about, okay, what are the consequences of what happens when your god or goddess or whatever is a dick and makes you do bad things or things contrary to what your character would naturally do. What happens when they are doing things exactly the way? So that's what I see in this situation, running with the brother. You are a hero, sure, but you are you've always had a problem. You never seem to make the right decisions. Your brother is he's just a simple guy. So yeah, he's almost your moral compass in this a lot of ways. He's the guy in a weird way who you wish you could be. You want to be that guy on the farm who has the wife and 3 kids. Like, but no, I have this weird murder addiction to go out and murder people because that's what adventurers do.
You know, I mean, it's not always people. Sometimes it's monsters.
Yeah.
On rare occasions, you do some good.
It's on very rare occasions. But I mean, that idea that what you're getting from them isn't material. So the king, you know, you as the ranger could never unite the land, but you found this one guy, your King Arthur, whatever, and he can. You see it in him, this pure soul. You will do anything you can to make sure that he gets there and stays up there. I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think when I think of non-death endings to campaigns, not necessarily endings to campaigns, ending to a character arc, there is something I really like about a character who, throughout all that they've been through, which is, you know, presumably over the course of 10 levels, 15 levels, 20 levels, I mean, who knows? it's extensive, chooses to remain in the service of something that at this point is objectively so much less than they are, but by some accounts, I think you nailed it. Someone that you can't possibly hope to be at this point. You've seen too much, you've done too much.
Yep.
But that that there's a it's a kind of a reflection of who you could have been had you not gone on to be a level 15 adventurer, or wherever it is your story ends. With regard to like I said, I mean, I'm particularly a fan of the return home, simply as the end of this. I mean, there's, I think oftentimes we think about this grand, and that's not to say that the grand finale didn't play out. And it's like, what does someone who, helped fell a god who was trying to dematerialize reality itself, what do they do after that? And, I think the answer to that question really speaks to what that character was beholden to from the very beginning.
Yeah.
That can develop, but if it's going back home, and just having that, if it's returning to the Lord or the King that you served when this all started, maybe your prowess drew you away into a bigger conflict. If it's returning to your god or goddess to simply serve as one of their acolytes, whatever it is,
right.
I think that those things that we're beholden to as characters, I've always been a fan of those being home base for the way a character can, and that could be, you could get to level 6 with a character and just go, I think this character's done all that they
and they go back
need to or want to do. And,
right.
And,
one of the greatest heroes of literature, Samwise Gamgee. And when he faced down Sauron, he was in the heart of the beast. What does he do? Goes home and marries the barmaid and has kids and has like a beautiful life. And that's a beautiful ending. Poor Frodo, he suffers for the rest of his life until he sails off to the Grey Havens. But
sometimes you're the Frodo and sometimes you're the Sam. No, so I think, but I guess we kind of got to a wrap up space a little differently than I anticipated. Do you have any thoughts with regard to the implications of tethering yourself, being beholden to a material entity?
Yeah.
How does that differ in your thinking as a player? And obviously the consequences aren't maybe to the same extreme. Maybe it's hard to say.
I feel like there's more wiggle room. You're dealing with a mortal, so you can maybe bargain a little bit more,
or kill him if he gets out of line.
And that's another thing.
You're a hero. He's just a dumb king,
stupid king. Anyway, but there's also, I feel, less repercussions as well. Don't get me wrong, there should and definitely should be consequences, but it's one thing to lose your class and another thing to be like, oh, we're entering a town controlled by this king. I got to wear a robe and I got to speak a little softer in this town. So, yeah, I would just say that it's just a little bit less than, but I totally agree with you. There needs to be consequences. That decision needs to follow you.
Yeah. I think I don't have much. I mean, I think those decisions we've hit on a number of times from square one as you're building out your character. You have more agency building your character out than you will probably ever have in the entire game.
Yeah,
I mean, we want characters and players to have as much agency as possible. But there's no question that part of the DM's job is to introduce conflict and scenarios and these, that say, here's the problem, now what do you do? But you still have variables that you're expressing your agency within. Yeah. When you're creating your character, in 5th edition anyways, the world is yours. You just make whatever you want. And so in the same regard, we certainly don't want to restrict that agency, but with that agency comes the responsibility of what have you tethered yourself to? What have what have you gone and done this time? It's and so I would just echo, both for DMs out there is, I don't think DMs generally have too big a problem with this, but if you're pulling your punches with regard to these relationships, these are powerful relationships. I'm talking about the class-based ones specifically.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that part of your job in running a powerful entity is to ensure the respect of, and it's very difficult to respect a god who won't stand up for themselves,
right?
Who won't put their foot down, who won't, and the player side being, acknowledge if you're signing into one of those contracts that you've signed on for the possibility that you and your DM in the skin of this entity that you are tethered to may not always see eye to eye on everything, and embrace that. That's a good thing.
Right.
It's a way more exciting thing than the king who goes like, well, you didn't do any of the things that you said you'd do or that I asked you to do, but you are my champion, so get in here, you fella. Let me just give you a noogie and you go get in there, have some of that feast.
And that's
in there,
how murder hobos get born.
So I think that both sides of the screen need to embrace the fact that these are powerful and sometimes difficult relationships.
Yeah.
And really should be your hand should be as heavy as anyone would expect it to be in those situations.
Right.
That is not, a blanket rake your character over the coals for the rest of the campaign because they've pissed you off. But it's ultimately up to you. Can you repair the relationship? The answer might be no matter what you do. You might have burned that bridge, but that doesn't mean that your character can't move in a different direction. You don't need that bridge to keep moving forward. But now you have to cross that river somehow.
Right.
Yeah. Thoughts on the player side?
Character sides, and I was just thinking back on our conversation. We pretty much just talked about like the consequences of not aligning. We didn't talk about like, hey, what happens when you actually are aligned and all that stuff. But I guess that's maybe a little bit more.
Well, and I think that's generally a little bit more written out. I mean, I agree. There's opportunities to go above and beyond what it says you're being. I mean, but I think that is not inherent to, hey, you're doing something really good for your god or goddess. If I saw a character doing something really good just because it's what their character, they're being very charitable or I'd go like, that's clearly not optimized. They just gave 300 gold pieces to that, they just donated 300 gold pieces to some charity. And I'd go like, that wasn't optimized, but I'm going to mark down on my notes that they may have garnered major favor with that organization.
Right.
There might be information opportunities.
Exactly.
There might be, so
yeah, I guess we didn't talk about, but I think you're right. It's also a little bit more obvious. So yeah, from the player character side, when you go into these higher, I would keep calling these alliances with whatever it is, whether it's a lord or a god, realizing that you're, like you said, you're signing a contract. I really like that it's an unwritten one, but you are saying like, hey, DM, let's work together. And that's key, is that you're working together. You're not both two people having their own, hey, I'm making this story. And no, this is my character. This is my story. No, you're working together to try to make a good story, which involves you will not probably get your way every time. But understand that you don't understand everything that's going on. And if you have the trust and the good faith, then run with it, and you might be very surprised, pleasantly, hopefully surprised at what comes out at the end. You might make some suboptimal. You might get your powers taken away for a little bit. You have two options. You can be like, well, screw this game. You're no longer my DM and walk away. Or, again, if you've demonstrated good faith, be like, okay, let's see where this goes.
Yeah. I think a big part. This will be my last note that you hit on there, is a big part of working together for a meaningful character arc to express itself for a character that is beholden to one of these entities. Sometimes definitionally means, sometimes me as a DM working together with you means challenging you with that deity, with that bond, with that tether, because it's frankly, it would be unbelievable that you would always be perfectly aligned, and it would also be boring as hell.
Yeah.
There should be times where, where that tether, where you come to a fork in the road and both of you try to go a different way, and you suddenly feel that tug, and then you're looking at each other like, "Fuck you, going?" Like that's an interesting space.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
All right.
Yeah. No, I think I would love to hear. I think I already laid one out, but I would love to hear from either side, but specifically the DM side. What are your thoughts? How are you handling, especially very powerful entities that the characters are in service to or beholden to? Do they tend to engage with them in a benevolent manner? I mean, even a good god can be iron-fisted,
Right.
Or are I tend to think of the gods as certainly for mortals being short-tempered, or at least not hugely accommodating.
Right.
But how do you guys think about them? How do you run them? And especially if you guys are working in your own homebrewed settings, what kinds of entities exist in these spaces for your players to find themselves in service to?
Yeah, if player characters, if you want to put in the comments, like, hey, when were you challenged the most? Like, whether it was a lord that you were just like, and put it in the comments. Those are fun stories to read.
Yeah.
Because again, those are often very pivotal moments in a character's arc.
Yeah.
Character arc.
100%. I want to hear the breaks. I want to hear when when you said no, I can't do this. I thought this was where I was aligned.
You as a character.
Yeah, as a
not
character.
As a table, but
as a when you said no, because that's, to me, that's really when things get
I like that.
juicy and interesting things start happening.
Absolutely.
So, that said, you got any other?
No, I think we're good to wrap this one up, my friend.
Any other thoughts? Well, as I am your generally benevolent DM,
Generally,
I command you to do my will, do my bidding, and let all those beautiful people at home know. You know what to let them know.
No, just kidding. The world is yours.